guest. He is coming directly from Gurdal in India to share his expertise with us. Shantanu Kodisia is with us today. And Shantanu, what a pleasure to have you with us. I know it's a lot later in India right now, and I'm very excited and thankful for you to take this time to share your expertise with us. Shantanu has over 26 years of rich experience in diverse fields like sales and marketing in the healthcare and pharmaceutical industry, heading operations and customer experience for e-commerce companies and leading businesses and P&Ls in the ITES space. He has worked with companies like Eli Lilly, Dell, GE Capital International Services, and IBM. For the last 8 years, he has been working for Sun Life as their Asia Service Center in India, where he is the head of operations. He set up a contact center in the Philippines and comes with a good experience of driving the use of value stream mapping to strategically re-engineer and transform processes and identify opportunities for RPA to enhance productivity and improve client experience. Shantanu is passionate about giving back to society and also leads corporate social responsibility for his current organization. Shantanu, what a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you for taking the time, and we very much look forward to your presentation.
Thank you so much, Jose. Okay, first of all, I would like to thank you all. It is such a pleasure for me to be speaking to such an august audience. My name is Shantanu, as Jose just introduced me, and I'm going to be speaking about re-engineering as a methodology to streamline the claims process and identify opportunities for RPA. Re-engineering is one of the methodologies which is used extensively to drive certain dramatic results. Certain of these results are not only just to go ahead and save costs or have a bottom line impact on the P&L, but it is also to drive a better client experience. And the current the times when digital transformation is one of the key agendas which a lot of organizations are driving. Re-engineering along with robotics process automation is clearly a tool which helps in creating a better work environment and also keeps organizations a little ahead of the competition. Moving to certain pieces of the agenda, we will be covering why re-engineering, how does it work, understanding the ecosystem as well as visualizing what the future state is, opportunities for prioritization, which could be there if at all, as well as finally coming out with a business case. Now, when I talk about why re-engineering? Why re-engineering is it has a major impact on certain different facets. As I said, re-engineering is a very radical redesign of business processes aimed to achieve dramatic improvements in critical aspects. Now, when we talk about, for example, quality, improved quality, right? We all go ahead and one of the important things for us is and this happens across industries and of course in financial services industries as well, is to ensure that the quality of services that we provide, quality is improved, right? And the quality of the work which we do, the quality of the transactions. Now, in addition to that, products and services, which need to be delivered with precision and accuracy. It is important, right? Moving on to the next thing is about output, right? Enhanced output, right? It is so important for organizations to ensure that the output increases, maybe with a lesser cost, which is there. Better efficiencies, right? Better efficiencies, as well as going ahead and driving and actually driving things that matter to the clients. Right, output is extremely important because it is not just about what the organization is looking at, but I think it is very important from a client perspective as to what actually the end client values and how is it that we are going ahead and delivering. So and a clear impact on the output. Costs, I think especially during these times more than ever before, the focus on costs has really increased. uh, Re-engineering helps in reduction of costs, right? Cost of production, clearly, because when you go ahead and streamline processes, you kind of eliminate the non-value adds, you go ahead and start impacting the cost, and which is a very, very direct impact. In addition to that, increasing revenues, because in a lot of ways, when the clients are happy, the outputs are better. They've had a good experience, the revenue starts going up, which also leads to an increase in market share. If you're ahead of the competition, your revenues are increasing. It will have an impact, a direct impact on the market share as well, and also generating economies of scale. It is so important that uh, that we have the economies of scale, so that you can get advantage of reduced costs. Talking about service, right? Better service standards for end clients today. Again, what the client expects is speed of service, quality of service, accuracy of what we are delivering. And this is exactly why better service standards for end clients become important. That also increases the stickiness of the client to the organization. And in a competitive market, the landscape which is there, clearly a great service can be a key differentiator for one organization versus the other. Talking about speed, once you go ahead and do re-engineering of the process, you can go ahead and clearly figure out where the bottlenecks are, what is it that can be eliminated, which can go ahead and impact the speed. And when you're talking about speed, it is clearly faster than what the traditional processes are, which some of them could be long drawn processes with a lot of non-value added steps. So that's where the speed becomes crucial. It also eliminates dependency on people and internal processes. It is very, very important to become, in a lot of ways, process dependent. Banking too much on people can clearly pose a risk to the organization. So it also eliminates the dependency on people and the internal processes. As far as convenience is concerned, it makes it convenient and easy to do business for the clients, clearly, and also for the employees. When in case they are going ahead and working on something, chances of, in any manual work, the chances of mistakes or errors are there, and it is but natural that they can go ahead and make some mistakes. But then if certain of the processes are re-engineered, there's an automation element which comes in. It helps in eradicating these redundancies. Moving on to the next portion of it is, how does it work? So clearly, talking about refocus, in a lot of ways, companies need to go ahead and refocus its values on the needs of the client. It is very, very important, and I'm sure everyone will agree, that more than inward focus, it has to have an outward focus, because whatever we're doing it for the end client out there. We are in business because of the end client out there. So refocus the company's values on the client's needs. Redesign, there will be core processes which are existing. Some of them could be legacy processes, some of them could be there, some of them could be slightly disjointed processes. So it is very, very important to go ahead and redesign some of these core processes. And it is often that technology is used to go ahead and enable these improvements. Moving on to reorganizing, a lot of times it becomes very, very important to reorganize. When you go ahead and actually map out and do the re-engineering, it becomes important to go ahead and reorganize a business into cross-functional teams with end-to-end responsibility for the process. We're talking about agile way of working also these days. So it'll be great if organizations, if they find that there are too many handoffs happening across teams, they can go ahead and reorganize them, get them together, and clearly give them the end-to-end responsibility. Of course, then rethinking the organizational and people, the basic organizational and people issues. A lot of times it is, considering what the future of work is, what we envisage for the business. It will become important at times to go ahead and clearly work on upskilling our people for certain of these certain of the opportunities for the future, and wherein reorganization becomes very, very important. And also, last but not the least, improving the business outcomes, right, for the client. So this is how re-engineering overall works. Now, the first step to that is clearly is understanding the ecosystem. So this is an example of a value stream map which has been drawn, um, wherein we're showing right from the input processing, right, and the end customer, right. So there's a supplier, there's customer at the end, and their different processes are mapped out. What is done is that between each processes, what the cycle time is, how much time is it taking, uh, that is mapped out. We look at things like what is the first pass yield, as in how many times wherein a task is done for the first time, right? And I mean, rather it is done and it is done correctly the first time. That is gone. That is mapped for each step. The entire information flow happens. So you have first pass yield, which is for each step, and you have the rolled first pass yield, which is for the entire end-to-end process. Now, while doing the value stream mapping, it can be done on two aspects. One aspect is it is very, very important that one of the aspects when you do a value stream map could be on the part of the process which is being done. Let's say, for example, there is certain work happening across locations. At one of the locations, they could just go ahead and do a value stream map at what's happening at one location. Or else what can also be done is an end-to-end process map, which is for the entire process right from the start to the finish across locations. The entire process flow is mapped, and that is actually recommended. If you can do end-to-end, it will clearly help people to go ahead and see the complete picture in front of them, and it will throw up a lot of opportunities which could be there for improvement. Now, a value stream map, it can also be termed into a client journey map, wherein you go ahead and map out the entire the journey of a client right from the time maybe a client who comes on board with an organization to the complete lifespan of the client with the organization, till maybe the claims are paid out, and in the middle servicing is there. So when the entire end-to-end mapping and a client journey map is done, along with value stream mapping, there are it'll become very, very evident as to where are the process gaps, what are the opportunities, where is it that automation can come in. Once the current state is kind of mapped out, what is done is go ahead and visualize the future state. Now, in visualizing the future state, it becomes very, very important to go ahead and foresee what is it that that a person would want to see the end state to be, right? Again, on a process driven value stream map, or an end-to-end value stream map, or on a client journey map, it is very, very important to think through, and this requires a lot of brainstorming, a lot of collaboration. Strategic intent becomes very important, because if the leadership buy-in is there, then only a lot of these strategic decisions can be made. If the leadership buy-in is not there due to any any particular reason, it'll become very difficult to go ahead and actually draw out a future state map and then drive improvements from there. Now, in this, this also forms in a lot of ways the base of what the client architecture or the business architecture is being visualized at the future state. And then you go ahead and map on top of that the technology architecture, which needs to be which needs to be put in place to enable the business and the client architecture, for better results in terms of either a client satisfaction or a bottom line impact through savings and efficiencies. Now, this is an example of a future state map which has been done, wherein again, if you see, for each step there is the first pass yield which is there. There is cycle time which is there for each step, And when you accumulate all of these, this also goes ahead and depicts the rolled first pass yield, which is basically a summation of the stepwise first pass yields. Uh, In addition to that, it is also going ahead and throwing up a lot of opportunities. If you see the Cloudburst or the Kaizen opportunities on top, right? These are basically the opportunities which are there, wherein certain intervention can be done. Now, a lot of times we'll find that, especially when we go ahead and work on the end-to-end value stream map or a client journey map, there will be a lot of opportunities. Some of them could be very basic, which just require certain minor system tweak or a process change. Whereas some of them, for example, the ones depicted out here in yellow, it could deal with opportunities for automation, right? For example, web and mobile pens. Now, I'll give you a very good example on this. There are certain organizations wherein, while they're driving the digital agenda, what is happening is that the claims, for example, they are being able to submit it on the web or through mobile. But then for all the supporting documents, what came out was that there's a separate process wherein they've got to email that across. Now, this is a great opportunity wherein possibly from a better client experience perspective, if we can go ahead and have all the claims along with all the supporting documents to get to be enabled for submission right through a technology intervention. In addition to that, for example, checking the eligibility, right? Uh, there have been certain organizations wherein through certain processes, what is happening is a claim comes in, the agent concerned goes ahead and starts working on the entire claim, going ahead and processing, and right at the last step, realizes that maybe the eligibility in itself, rather the client is not eligible even for that claim. So what happens is there's a lot of time which gets wasted because the person has done already completed all the steps and has spent time in those steps. So what that leads to, and that's an example, what that actually leads to is non-value added time, right? The wastage of time, and time wastage is clearly a dollar value impact. So can we go ahead and set up something through technology wherein the moment a client enters a claim, the eligibility check is done right up front, and the moment that eligibility check is done, when it comes for processing, all the person or the agent needs to do is go ahead and, in case there is some additional information required or something, can go ahead and ask for it. Or it could also be a clear throughput process wherein there is no intervention, so it's auto adjudicated claims wherein there's no need for an intervention of rather any human intervention. It is just that through technology, it is a clear throughput which happens. Now, with all of these things, because there will be a lot of opportunities, right, which could come up, how does one go ahead and prioritize, and how is the action planning done, right? If you see this grid out here, talks about the business value as well as the complexity. Now, if you see, there's low as well as high on both the ends. Now, the first one, which could be looked at, is business value, which is high, and also complexity high. And of course, there are time which will run parallelly with high business value and low complexity. The reason why I talk about high business value and high complexity is these are generally very strategic and decisions which have to be taken, wherein there is a lot of element of complexity which gets involved. Now, the moment this complexity gets involved, and it becomes important to maybe at times even split some of those opportunities into smaller opportunities, and they get worked on, because at the end of it, the resultant business value will be phenomenally high. Uh, Parallelly, what can also be done is some of these opportunities which have come out, which are high in terms of business value but low in terms of complexity, that could actually also be looked at, in a great way to go ahead and just go ahead and to be worked upon, so that the resultant is there. Business high business value is there for the taking. What then needs to be done is, you need to go ahead and look at how is it that we can remove the redundant steps from the process. Once that is done, so a lot of times, in some of the examples I gave earlier, especially in the legacy processes or the systems which are there are certain steps which have been happening over a period of time, and possibly no one's gone ahead and challenged them. So it'll be important to go ahead and remove those redundant steps, and then also go ahead and automate. Look at identified, repetitive or rule-based kind of work. Some of that work could also be prone to human error. Identify that, and then build a case for RPA. So especially when the volumes are high of work and it is rule based, that's a great opportunity. That's a great contender for building up a good business case for robotics process automation. And in that, of course, a little part is also, delegating certain part of the process, or maybe could also be termed as collaborating with certain other departments to take action, wherein very, very specific expertise is required. While we will expect everyone to go ahead and work on end to end, but there could be certain very specific places wherein specialized skills or expertise is required. Go ahead and collaborate with them to go ahead and have a better and a more streamlined process. So through this entire thing, a person will be able to identify, which are the Kaizen opportunities or process improvement opportunities which actually one can gun for, and which are the ones which could actually be kept either in the parking lot or are not worth the effort because the business value could be low, but the complexity of doing that could be high. So that entire prioritization metrics can come out through this. Moving on to building a business case, and this at the end becomes extremely important, is how does one go around building a business case for robotics process automation. In this, what becomes very critical is the fact that the use case selection. Now, use case selection, as I just mentioned, it has to be rules based processes which have significant transactional work. So the volumes of that work, if the volumes are high and it is rule based, clearly it goes ahead and becomes one good case for RPA. In addition to that, it is important the work it has a structured data that's there. It could be simple and mature and well-defined processes. So wherein the processes are simple, mature, well-defined, that could be there. High volumes we spoke about, as well as high FTE allocation. So places where you have a huge amount of human intervention, large number of people going ahead and working on that. Processes where the cost of rework is high and quality is slightly poor. So there are and we clearly when we look at financial services as an industry, there are lots of processes wherein one slight error or mistake can lead to a fairly significant amount of rework, the cost of which is high. So that could be looked at. Processes which are impacting both cost line as well as the revenue line. That is another thing. There, of course, could be a few exceptions and something which is not on the roadmap for new systems. Now, you've got to be very careful because a lot of organizations are embarking on a journey wherein they're either changing the platform on which work is happening or getting a newer technology in place, new systems in place. Now, if there is something happening and there's a process related with that, that may not be a contender for RPA, because it's no point investing in RPA and then realizing that the entire system or the platform has gone ahead and changed, and then the whole thing needs to be reworked. So the use case selection becomes important. In addition to that, looking at the costs and the returns of investment. So the total cost of ownership, which gets segregated actually into two. One is capital expense or a one-time cost to a great extent, right? A one-time cost could comprise of things like development cost. It becomes critical to look at. Along with that, operational expense. So this is very important, is to go ahead and see what are the operational expenses leading to the licensing cost, infrastructure cost, or support cost. Now, there are times wherein there is a cost of development which is X, but the operational costs are significantly high and has an impact on the overall ROI. There could also be situations wherein it is just that the initial capital expense is high, but the recurring expenses are low. So these all have a clear impact on the business case, which is kind of getting developed. What happens then is when you go ahead and plot it on the grid in terms of the benefits and the automation scope and effort, generally, of course, it could vary from organization to organization, but something which comes in the window of a 1 year payback period, when you can recover your costs and there's a return on investment in 1 year, that becomes a good contender for people to go ahead and invest in that. And this is so important because once with a very where the ROI, return on investment, comes at after a long time, it could prove to be maybe not that beneficial or not that lucrative, because the higher the ROI, that in turn means is that the operational expenses are generally high for or maybe even the capital expenses is high for that particular opportunity, for that improvement to be done. There are clearly benefits for the taking. Benefits like increasing the yield or productivity, wherein with the same number of people, you could go ahead and do a high number of work. Rather, I would say enhanced amount of work. Or it could also be, that with lesser people you could do the same job. So clearly that is, and then that is a very direct bottom line saving from a P&L perspective. In addition to that, it also gives an opportunity to reskill and upskill the employees. Now, especially in the current times when the processes, the technology, etc., is changing, it is very important to go ahead and reskill the employees. In a lot of ways, when and in organizations, they'll find is that when RPA is being implemented, the first question which comes from a lot of employees is, what happens to us? I think it's critical to go ahead and tell them that what is getting automated are just the mundane repetitive tasks, but the more complex work is still available for them to be kind of working on. And a lot of these employees will need to be reskilled because they may have certain experience, certain exposure, but as an organization, if you're investing in them, not only are you enhancing the human capital which exists and investing in that, but also creating a great environment for the employees who feel valued, that the organization is investing in them. Then there are times wherein there are peaks. There could be a steady volume flow, and then there could be certain peaks which are there. This RPA will go ahead and actually also help in a great way to go ahead and manage that peak. That becomes critical, because you don't need to unnecessarily staff for the peak, but you already have an automation in place which can take care of certain of those peaks. A reduction in paid overtime, possibly, since the automation is leading and it's actually taking up a lot of those volumes. So reduction in the overtime requirements. Certain of the legacy systems which are there, as well as certain of the systems which are being implemented. There are times when you'll find the RPA which has been built. It is fairly easy to deploy on both the sides, which is there. Of course, it will also lead to generating, or increasing the revenues, increasing the bottom line, as you were speaking about. And last but not the least, client satisfaction. The moment the cycle time reduces, the moment the turnaround time is better, it leads to a very direct positive impact on the client. So that becomes extremely one of the, and which, the moment you have very happy and satisfied clients, it I'm sure everyone will agree that it leads to generally leads to better revenues flowing in, because the stickiness of the client with the organization is increasing. One of the things that needs to be kept on mind is, once the RPA has been kind of implemented, the bot has been implemented, are two things. At times, it's seen that certain of these, a lot of the people, when it comes to going ahead and clicking on the bot to run the bot, or certain of those things, a lot of times right at the beginning, maybe and there are two situations. At times what has been seen is the usage of that in the beginning by the employees is high, and over a period of time it again comes down because they have a habit of doing certain of the processing themselves. Or on the other side, it could also be that the usage is slow. It picks up, but picks up over a period of time. So what will be important at that stage is to have a tracking mechanism as to, is the adequate usage happening or not. Because if the adequate usage is not happening, it will impact the business case. When the business case was done, certain gestation period had been kind of looked at, or period for ROI had been looked at. But if there is a situation wherein that the uptake is not very good, it will definitely have an impact. So have a clear tracking mechanism, see what is the usage, is the usage appropriate, is it not happening, and then maybe it also becomes imperative to go ahead and engage with the employees at large to encourage them to use it, and kind of share the benefits. So this is what I had primarily on re-engineering and RPA, right? And thank you.
Shantanu, great coverage. Thank you so much for that. I'm monitoring the questions from the audience, and I will be relaying them to you here. And I want to let the audience know that bring your questions up. Continue to bring your questions up. I've seen a few of them already, and I'm gonna continue to pass it on to Shantanu during our talk here. So, how do the concepts that Shantanu has covered here apply to your specific context? Use this space and this time for getting insights that are available to you in your specific context. Now, Shantanu, first of all, masterclass on mastering complexity. One of the things that you talked about so eloquently is the fact that well, you didn't say explicitly, but it's implicit in your presentation that there are a lot of people and organizations who kind of jump into technology. And as one of my favorite speakers often says, that technology is great when it enables your processes to deliver greater value, but technology also can make stupid happen at the speed of light. So you need to have the right technology for the right application. That's one issue. The other issue is that we have very complex systems and organizations and customer service deliveries, and amongst all of that complexity, it's not uncommon when we get a lot of very smart people to work on those systems and processes that they end up wrapping up complex solutions around the complex systems that they have, and partially because they do not really understand the essence of what they even have. So you have a really great approach, disciplined approach, to take a deep dive and understand what your current processes are and how they create value for customers with your value stream mapping and other discipline approaches. So I'm gonna get the first question here coming from William Fuller. First of all, he says, what a great structure and presentation. I think that for the less experienced professionals and leaders, they may actually not grasp the depth of some of the concepts that you're talking about, because it takes a lot of practice to understand some of the things that you discuss. But the comment from William is excellent presentation and organization of concepts, first of all. And then the question is, to get us started, could you speak some of the hurdles in adopting, implementing, and governing this very disciplined and elegant approach that you suggested? What are the challenges of getting this approach that you described implemented in organizations?
Sure. I think first of all, I think gentleman just actually in a lot of ways answered that himself is that this requires a huge structural, it is a structured process. I think what happens is a lot of times the understanding of this at the leadership levels in the leadership forums of this entire structured process is slightly limited. There are a lot of people who understand, but the critical thing is first and foremost is to have the buy-in from the leadership. If the buy-in from the leadership is there, it becomes easier to go ahead and implement some of these things. Now, the two, three things what happens is one is a lot of times when businesses are spread across different locations and there are handoffs happening from one location to the other. Um, Mapping out the end-to-end becomes absolutely crucial, because if you just map out what is happening in your location, you're possibly mapping out only a portion of the entire process. So getting people to get together to understand the importance and mapping the whole thing end to end, that is the first thing which needs to be done, which at times becomes difficult across locations. But once collaboration is there, it can become fairly seamless. That's one. Number two is clearly is on prioritization and the budgets available, because there are certain times wherein it requires a high amount of budget at the beginning, but of course, though the ROI could be there, but at times again when the leadership buy-in is slightly less, then there is a little hesitation in putting in that upfront amount, that investment rather. uh, the third thing, once everything is done, what is extremely important is the usage. Because if the usage is not proper, it has a very, very direct impact on the payback time, on the return on investment. So we've, in certain organizations where I've been interacting with, we've seen that after the bot was implemented, the usage was barely about 50%. Now, if the usage was 50%, naturally the return on investment, the time period got delayed, and the time period getting extended is again a direct dollar value impact. So they had to work very, very closely on and quickly on a war footing to improve the usage. That's it. From the employee perspective, what happens is a lot of times there's a certain little bit of hesitation, because at times they feel that what will happen to their work if things through re-engineering start getting automated. So you got to go ahead and clearly work on a culture which goes ahead and reassures them, upskills them, so that change management at times becomes very, very important. But once these things come in order, the resultant is high, and of course someone will need to keep a track of of the bot, right? If by chance is there a certain defect or something, but normally there isn't, but track of that. And in case the process changes, right, somewhere, then there has to be a tweak done to the bot, because if the bot is used to a particular process. Now, if you want to make certain process tweaks, then you got to keep on mind that there's a bot out there which also needs to be tweaked. So I think these are some of the aspects which come up as hurdles, but can also be handled fairly easily, over a period of time.
Very well. So you talked about a few things in there that seem easy but are incredibly hard to do, and specifically on getting the leadership commitment, and also the concept of collaborative leadership. Now, in your case, because of your incredible cross-industry experience and maturity over time, I am sure you have developed collaborative leadership skills. You can go in an organization like a financial services organization and you start influencing the leadership and the members of the team to start thinking more holistically about their processes and start thinking about how to understand and create and streamline them before you automate them. That's no trivial step, because those collaborative leadership skills that you have and the influential skills you have developed throughout your career are hard to develop, and a lot of people who have perhaps lived their whole career in financial services don't have the perspective that you do. So my question is, and I'm capturing the themes that the audience has shared during your presentation, is give us some tips. Give us some tips for someone who doesn't have the cross-industry experience you have had. You have learned things from industrial places, which are really tough, where you had to really streamline some very complex processes. And then you go into financial services, and now everybody thinks that they're special and their processes are unique, and but they don't have those perspectives on how to work through the streamlining of those processes and how to influence leadership to allow them to operate in that collaborative fashion. So tell me a little bit about how do you, what is the magic for you? How do you influence leadership to take a more holistic approach? How do you tell people who are very eager to apply technologies as a fix to slow down and let's look at the process holistically? What are some of the tips that you would have for practitioners who may not be as experienced with you as you are?
That's a great question, Jose. So in this, what becomes critical is when we are talking to the leadership. A lot of times, if they haven't had the exposure on this, is to first kind of give them certain examples of certain places where it has been implemented, certain kind of results which are there, and in case the resistance is there, to speak about just a little bit of a pilot. So mapping out processes is not a huge investment. Yes, it does require certain time and effort and energy. It does require that. I will not negate that effort, but when you talk about the cost of development of the RPA tools, that is definitely much higher. I think the moment you map out the processes and you're able to kind of show that back to the leaders, it automatically is so visual that the opportunities for improvement and the Kaizen opportunities, the cloudburst which we saw in that value stream map, it becomes so glaring and stark that it actually gets a person to kind of take notice of that. And once that is linked with the kind of an impact which either the negative impact which is happening because of those opportunities, or the positive outcomes which can come out of working on those Kaizen opportunities, if that can be showcased, that is something which starts getting the interest in, and the buy-in starts coming in. Of course, it's easier said than done. It takes certain time, but my recommendation and advice would be is, after speaking, at least show them one or two the value stream maps with certain of these opportunities to kind of tickle their interest, if I'm to say that.
Very, very good. I want to follow up here because Anna Martinez has an even deeper question now on this topic. So let's go explore this a little bit deeper. It's sometimes difficult and to estimate and capture cost savings or benefits or value creation from documenting business processes. It's sometimes it can be perceived as a bureaucratic kind of activity that some quality person is, want to document our processes, then so what? What are some of the tips that you may have for capturing the value and the, other than the intangible perception that it's a good thing to document our processes? Is there any tips on capturing value creation from documenting business processes?
First of all, when it comes to this kind of thing, again, the leadership, the ethos, because the culture in an organization a lot of times trickles from top to bottom. So, and when I talk about top, I'm not just talking about the CEO. I'm even talking about business heads and process heads. I think if they go ahead and treat a person who is doing these value stream map as it's not just a quality person, but a person from the business in itself, that's the first step which gets that buy-in, because that person understands it. And then going ahead, and when you're mapping it out, the reason why cycle times, for example, are mapped, or the first pass yield are mapped, uh, that mapping actually will throw up a financial impact, because if the cycle time is lesser, possibly, or if the rework is lesser because the first pass yield is high, it'll tell you that if your first pass yield is at 85%, you are needing, let's say, 100 people to churn out the volumes. But if that first pass yield goes up from an 85% to a 95%, maybe instead of 100 people, you will just need maybe 90, 91, 92 people. So the cost efficiencies derived out of that will be a direct cost saving. Now it can, and it becomes, and that is the pure reason. Now, if the cycle time, for example, is, let's say, 15 days to go ahead and, let's say, get a client right from the time the client sends a new client or customer sends in the documents for, let's say, a new insurance policy, and let's say if it takes 15 days to go ahead and process the whole thing and let the client know that his or her policy has been covered, for example, if that can be shrunk from 15 days to 10 days, the 5 days is a saving, and there can be a dollar value again associated with that. And again, if there's a better client experience and your NPS scores, for example, if it goes up, and you see a corresponding increase overall on the revenues which are coming in, there can be a correlation drawn. So while everything may not be absolutely black and white, but there can always be correlations and always be certain dollar values which can be framed out of this.
Shantanu, thank you so much for sharing your expertise today. A real masterclass on the excellence that's needed to scale innovation for great enduring performance. So this is a very needed topic for our audience. We're very grateful for you to take the time and share that expertise with us today.
Thank you so much, Jose, and thank you so much to the organizers and everyone. It's been a pleasure speaking out here. Thank you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Shantanu Kodisia directly from Gurdal in India to the world, and a real masterclass on the fundamentals and foundations of excellence that are so critical to scale innovation and technology automation effectively. So wonderful concepts, wonderful structure and coverage. We're going to wrap up the session, and we're going to be back with you at the top of the hour with Saeed Sanaullah, who is the Vice President of Corporate Strategy and Strategic Planning at Wells Fargo. And Saeed is going to talk to us about advancing market segmentation during and post COVID-19. So we're going to hear directly from a leader in strategy and planning for a major financial organization, and how the pandemic has affected the organization, how it has affected the way that the organization plans and looks at the future. So we're going to see you back with Saeed Sanaullah at the top of the hour. See you soon.